Ladies and gentlemen, I am excited about this one. If you are hearing this, you have once again tuned in the Consequence of Habit podcast. This is your host, JT, and we're going to talk to one of my childhood heroes today. But before that, this podcast, like all the other podcasts, are brought to you by our friends at Athletic Brewing Company, makers of the finest non-alcoholic beer on the market, in my opinion. Their Free Wave, their new hazy IPA, well, not new, but new to be a staple product. It's outstanding. It's literally unbelievable. If you like IPAs, if you just like good beer, but you don't want all the booze, you don't want the bad decision making, the potential DUI, the fights with your spouse, boyfriend, kids, whatever, then just be kind to yourself. Log on to Athletic Brewing Company, use the promo code capital COH20 and get 20% off your first order. All right, now on to one of the biggest guests I could imagine coming on the podcast. This week, we welcome the three-time Tour de France winner, two-time world champion, first and officially only American to have won the Tour de France, Mr. Greg Lamont. Greg was just an awesome guest. We get into his newest project, Lamont Bicycles, some of the awesome stuff coming down the pipe with that. Of course, we cover his cycling career and the ups and downs of everything on the bike, off the bike. We get into some of that emotional side of things of ego and identity and, all that stuff I love talking about. So without further ado, please welcome to the podcast one of my heroes, Mr. Greg Lamont. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am here with three-time Tour de France winner, two-time world champion, Mr. Greg Lamont. Greg, I very much appreciate you coming on.
Nice to be on, JT.
So I'm going to try not to geek out. I'm going to try and play it cool. All right, I'm going to play it cool. Okay. All right, so this is a big deal to have you on. You're somebody who I grew up watching. I was going to tell you I had a poster of you on my wall, but I felt as two grown men, it's an odd thing to tell each other. So I'm going to
look a lot younger than me, so that's okay. So you're a teenager, probably.
Yeah. So
maybe even younger than that. Yeah. You're probably 6 years old.
So many things I want to talk to you about, Greg. But one of the things that really stands out, and even researching for this podcast, so I had Greg Lamont, the bike racer, in my mind, and I knew you were open to innovation within the sport of cycling, with the aero bars and some of the technology you were using early on in the time trials. But through this research, I really found out that technical side is a huge part of you as a person. And you literally were not just slapping your name on bikes and selling them, that you are really hands-on within the process of bike building. Yeah,
I started my bike company in 86, and it's only a reason. Everybody says, "Oh, I recognize innovation more than I did have a real role in creating the very first Giro helmet with Jim Gentis, who's the founder, and it was so simple. It was taking a Baby Bell helmet that I bought at Target, drawing lines on it and making it looks like a hairnet helmet from when I was racing, and making a safe helmet. Jim went back and made a prototype, and we were supposed to be partners in that company. But there's no product liability. But anyways, that's the one product I really did have a large role in. And I was one of the first athletes who used Oakley, and I saw it right in the prototype. But it wasn't that I had no part in the development of that, but I recognized that it was an odd time to ever wear a glass like that. It was like wearing ski goggles in cycling, which would be Ray-Ban, it'd be fashionable. But they were functionally really good. It was really I thought it was a competitive advantage. And so when I started my bike company, I was in 1986, we were approached by a guy that made there were actually carbon fiber bikes attempted use in the Tour de France, like in 84. They had, right at that point, it was bonding aluminum lugs to a carbon fiber tube, and they had bonding issues. And one guy literally almost died from his bike breaking. Wow. So this guy that invented it, he went on to be the engineer of Time bicycles, but they invented a bonding process between the aluminum and carbon fiber. So I used a carbon fiber frame that year, and our bike was overall about 1.5 pounds lighter,
Wow.
maybe 2 pounds lighter than a steel bike, but at the top of a mountain, that's a lot of time.
It's huge.
So after I won that, I won the Tour de France. And typically we're in a pro team. You don't have much to say on what bikes you ride. It's basically who's sponsoring the team. But usually if you win the Tour de France, you can dictate some of that, what you want to ride. And I really, after knowing the competitive advantage of carbon fibers, I wanted to make sure I was riding on the very best equipment, not just what sponsor was sponsoring the team. So I started my bike company right after that, mainly. So if I went to another team, it was just somewhat of a business idea that maybe I'd create a bike company,
Sure.
But it was more to make sure that I was always able to race on the very best bikes and the best equipment. It usually never came from the big companies. And most of the great inventions come from entrepreneurs, guys who have ideas. And that's where, Craig Calfee, who made my first full carbon fiber bike in the Tour de France in 1991, he didn't come from Trek. He didn't come from, he literally out of his garage made a full carbon fiber bike. And so even with the guy who invented the triathlon bar, Boone Lennon, he was a ski coach, women's ski coach, national downhill ski coach. Peekaboo Street at the time was really big, but he was a cyclist too. And he took the aerodynamics of a downhill skier and applied that to cycling. And so all these things, I recognize that all these great little inventions come from guys that have another idea. I was the very first guy to use a power meter, one of the very first guys in the early 90s. And Uli Schober in Germany, he was a cyclist and decided he wanted to measure his power output.
Yeah.
So all these things, I just happen to have an open mind where pro cycling is very traditional. You basically don't take any risk on equipment. You basically do what you're told. And so I just was a personality. I just wasn't that. I came from the United States, and I wouldn't say I fit the typical build of a personality of a pro cyclist. And I've had a reputation cycling that I used to play golf during the Tour de France, which wasn't true, but I really would do research and cut the BS out of stuff. I mean, somebody said, you have to take a vitamin. Why? What's the purpose? Does it really make a difference? And so that's just my personality.
Yeah.
And so as I got into, when I got done with cycling, I ended up doing a licensing partnership with Trek, and it was satisfying in the beginning, but really wasn't satisfying really through the relationship because they didn't really have me involved as much as I wanted to be involved. So I now have started my own company, and we're hands-on. I'm hands-on on the design, everything from manufacturing. So finally, after 35 years, I'm doing stuff that I really am excited about doing.
And rightfully so. I mean, looking at these new Lamont bikes, first of all, aesthetically, they're awesome. They really are they just look like great. They just look like they're fun to ride. And I liked my experience within the world of road cycling, which is very small, is like you said, they're very traditional. It's not a niche, but there's a level of, if they're going to make a product, it's for road racing. And
right.
And what's great to see with these new bikes is they're literally for anybody. They look first of all, they look fast. I've never seen a bike with a basket on the front still look so fast.
Well, I mean, I say it costs as much to do a bad design as a good design. So, but I love design, and I'm inspired by, Apple and automotive, whether it's a BMW to Porsche to Audi or whatever, but I think aesthetics and design is really important for a product. And that's what I mean, most people know, I love architecture, furniture, I collect stuff. So design's really a passion of mine. I have a really good industrial designer that I work with, but we're literally daily going over, he'll throw a design back. I'll go back with some other ideas, but I'm really at a fun period in my life. I'm 59-year-old entrepreneur, but it's really been, we're not only just designing, but we're making our own products. We're innovating in manufacturing. I am coming out with a state-of-the-art road bike, but we purposely wanted to come out with e-bikes because I didn't want to become, say, a company only known for elite road racing. I'm not that person anymore. And I see the value of bikes way beyond just a road racer. Although I love road racing, it's in my DNA. And believe it or not, US road riding has changed, probably flipped a gravel riding, but still road riding and the Tour de France is still gaining in popularity, and especially in Asia. So that's, I do have some exciting, we're going to have a bike that I think it's going to be the first full carbon fiber bike, no metal on it. And then it's going to be almost, I would say, failure proof almost. I say that because there's always something that can fail, but I'm saying if it fails, it will be safe. It won't be a catastrophic failure. So I'm really excited about some of the material stuff that we're doing. We have some new IP that we're bringing to the market that I think will give our bikes a lot more value to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So, but in fact, I was in a meeting for 3 hours. We're kind of looking at just automation type ideas, but this is what I love right now is that when you're building a company, but I'm really product more than anything. There's so many great ideas, and it's kind of narrowing them down. But what I like is I'm broad open. We've had some relationships in the composite industry that have really been really valuable to us. But it's mainly because we're open to new ideas, and so that's kind of bringing that same bike. When I was racing, seeing innovation that somebody else is doing, just putting them all together. So that's kind of, I guess it's part of my DNA. Yeah. But it's part of I get passionate about it too.
Yeah, I heard you on another interview yesterday, and shout out to Rob Reed on psychology. You were talking about just cycling, and the more people you get onto bikes, the better, right? That's that. At the end of the day, the goal is to get as many people onto bikes to feel the wind passing, by their, and to feel the joy that comes along with and exercising. And I love that. I love that kind of stance on it. This isn't just to build a bike. Sure, we're going to make a road bike that's going to be fast, and if anyone, top pros could ride it. But at the same time, we're trying to be as inclusive as possible and get just people to enjoy the sport of cycling, which I thought was very cool.
And I think the bike industry, not probably today, but has been, imagine the average person wanting to get into bike riding, they go into a pro shop, and how intimidating that would be, and then go in to a pro shop and ask for an e-bike. Now it's finally coming around the US, but e-bikes have been really popular for 10 years in Europe, and the taboo of riding an e-bike has kind of gone away. In fact, road bikes are being made with e-bike motors. And so it's, you look at, not everybody be a Tour de France rider. And I get the mechanical purity, I get it, but that's fine, but that should not prevent anybody from enjoying cycling. And I do think e-bikes will bring people back to the joy of riding. I'm going to say my wife and I have been married for 40 years, and she has a road bike, but she's ridden that 10 times. And it's funny. She doesn't, I keep wanting to get her into cycling because it's such a great sport. And then she's been riding since last fall. Last September she's been on an e-bike, and she's done more riding than she's ever done in 40 years of marriage, wow, which is a big, big thing. And she's having a blast doing it. So that's the essence of life, is actually enjoying what you're doing. And I think that is what cycling is. What's great about cycling is that it becomes a lifelong passion, not a short-term weight loss exercise deal. That's where I look at, anything you do should do something that you can enjoy doing the rest of your life. And if it's painful to work indoors, it's boring, you're not going to do that forever.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think cycling can really change. But I also think today, what's so crazy is this COVID, but, environmentally, you just look at the push to redesign cities and the push to get people on bikes. And I think I just read there might be something passed to give like a $1,500 credit, tax credit for e-bikes to get people on e-bikes in the US.
Fantastic.
That'd be unheard of. I can't even believe that. I keep thinking cycling is going to get banned from the roads, and it's the opposite. Globally, they're changing cities to make room for bike riders. And I think Amsterdam is your perfect example of handling congestion, and with bikes, you can pack so much more people into a single lane of a car lane than I think it's 10,000 to 800 vehicles with one person versus 10,000 people on that same road. Wow. Anyways,
yeah. Well, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Pat Kunan. And so I've been over to the Netherlands a few times, and I was saying I was just blown away. I got off the train, and it was like a sea of bikes. And I was like, this is unbelievable. And he kind of walked me through a little bit that, hey, that's not a mistake. That isn't just because a bunch of people decided they like riding their bikes. It was the government. They made it a priority.
Oh, yeah.
They made it a priority, and there were some growing pains, but at the end of the day, there's the benefits. I mean, the juice definitely is worth the squeeze.
Oh yeah, you're right. Well, after World War II, they had, some cities were just destroyed, at least parts of the city, and then as they're rebuilding, I remember reading an article that they looked at some of the historical buildings they didn't want to alter, but the thought process already started in the late 40s, 50s about planning for future growth and how hard it would be to handle the traffic. But it still took until the 70s and really big push to redesign things. I remember reading an article about Rotterdam and they designed the city very similar to what American City would be, like big roads, squared blocks, and they found people didn't like it because they literally had to get in their car to drive 2 kilometers. It just changed everything. And then they purposely set out. And today it's magical. I don't care who you are. If you're a motorcyclist, a car enthusiast, you go to Holland, it's literally a highway network of bikes. And I said the one bike we designed is a Dutch bike, and it's the classic Dutch bike. It's upright riding for riding in city commuting. And some of our best trips with our kids have been riding in Amsterdam on Dutch bikes. We lived in Belgium, so we had our Dutch bikes in Belgium. But no, and I'm excited that cycling continues to grow. And it's obviously I'm in the business, but it's not purely that. I'm always amazed that cycling still is the most efficient form of transportation, and the benefits are so great in terms of the way people feel, and it's addictive, so people stay with it for life.
Absolutely. All right, so I want to go back a little bit, a lot of bit, to your journey within cycling, because I've heard you talk about this a couple times in different interviews, and I'm always amazed on how nonchalant you go through certain periods of your life. And I'm sure it's because you've lived through them, and maybe you're not dwelling on them. But correct me if I'm wrong. You start cycling with your dad, and it's to train for skiing, correct?
Yeah.
The process from the time you start cycling, and you're how old at this point?
Just turned 14.
All right. So from 14 to the time that you're doing something which I would think is completely unheard of, and it's to moving to Europe on your own. Am I?
Yep.
And racing in a sport that is, really at that time was truly just a European sport. That is a huge leap of faith. Not just for yourself, but for your parents. Walk us through that a little bit, because every time I've heard you talk about it, it's like, wow, then I moved to Europe and I started racing and I started doing good. And as a parent, I'm sure as a 17-year-old, you're like, hell yeah, that sounds great. But as a parent, that's a big deal.
It's crazy. Well, sometimes I think was more mature than than I am now. But it is kind of crazy because I grew up in Los Angeles and, normal kid life. And then when I was middle of third grade, we moved from Los Angeles to Lake Tahoe, which was a life-changing experience because we're going from it sounds great, sunny California, but in the winter or the summer when it's really warm, we lived close enough to the coast that most days were overcast. So it was kind of like, you're always kind of living with smog and fog, honestly. And I remember as a kid, when it cleared up one day, you could see the San Gabriel Mountains in Los Angeles. I think that's what it is. Be like, oh my gosh, there's mountains. But when you moved to Lake Tahoe, it was just like 8 feet of snow. It was a big snow year. But I got into skiing, downhill skiing. I got into fishing. I was not into sports, organized sports, because I, lived in incline villages. I did play Little League, I think, for 2 years, but I was really passionate about outdoors hiking. And so for me, it wasn't about competition. And my sister had gotten into gymnastics in 72 or 73, really inspired by Olga Korbut in the 72 Olympics. And so she literally, I'd say my family the sports that my dad and mom did were bowling and trap shooting. So, and they grew up literally like blue collar neighborhood in Lakewood, California. It's right after World War II. My grandfather was a longshoreman. He literally built some of the stuff in Guam, the ports and all that. But anyways, but we weren't coming from a sporting background. That's why I said I didn't follow big sports. But my sister got in. She was really quite good in gymnastics, and I actually won the state championships in trap shooting.
Oh, there you go.
but like 15 people competing, not a big deal. But so when I got into skiing, it was really when I decided what I'd wanted to do in skiing was freestyle skiing, which was, for me, it was more moguls and aerials and jumps and all that. So that's kind of like my mentality. It wasn't like competitive. And, but then when I started riding with my dad, we had a drought that year. Then, literally it was January of 76. I had no idea of what cycling was as a sport. Although we saw a race the year before, 2 races, the state championships around in front of our house. It was the first time I ever saw a bike race. And then we followed a race that was for the Pan Am trials that year, but still had no real clue what bike racing was. And I met somebody in a bike shop. They got me to come to the club meeting 2 weeks later. They had a January, 2 weeks later, did a club race. I got second. 2 weeks later, it was an organized race, and I won it. And then I won my first 11 races. And now going from buddy who never competed in something like a competitor to winning and being really, really good. I was somehow really talented in what I did, but I quickly was really good at tactics, strategy. But I always remember that first race I won, I think I got $150 worth of prizes. Imagine going, literally, I did a club race in running shoes, shorts. We had a national champion in that 40-man pack. We had actually really good experienced racers. And I go from running shorts, tennis shoes, a 30-pound bike to buying a 40-pound bike, buying a Chinelli the week later, then entering my first bike race with a yellow jersey because it was matching my bike. But I got, what's interesting for me, and I think kind of plays into in my career, kind of like, you could talk to pros, they wouldn't believe anybody could do a career without taking drugs. I'm just saying that's just the mentality of the sports and it's not just cycling, it's running, everything. But, after my 11th race, I'm 14 years old. After my 11th victory, I asked permission from the officials if I could race in the age category above, because it really wasn't challenging for me. And so I didn't win another race that year, but I competed against much better riders, and I had a restricted gear. And I got second place in a race called Nevada City. And for me, the highlight of my first year was a race called Mount Tamalpais, which is out in San Francisco, and it's where kind of mountain biking was invented. Mm-hmm. And so I raced with a guy named George Mount, who was 6th place in the Olympics just a month before. And it was a 2,500-foot climb. And I think I would have won it if I had the right gears, but he couldn't drop me. So I go back now, I look back at that first year. It was kind of crazy, but I went from just not knowing anything to actually being probably as good at 14 as anybody in the country at that time. And so and then I say this because it looks like, how could you move to Europe? But, what I was very logical about it. And at that time, everybody, thought the Europeans were that much better. We were kind of, there's no way we can compete. And I think the following year when I was racing, I started winning almost every race I entered. Again, I asked to race into the category above, which was with, they called amateurs at that time, but Olympic level riders. And so I became really the best in the country, even at that age category at 16. But when I went to Europe just turned 17, I went to Europe, invited by a friend named Kent Gordis. His dad lived he was the first guy that I really competed against in California, but his dad lived in Switzerland, Geneva, and he invited me over for 2 months to race in Switzerland, France, and Belgium. And our national coach at the time, a guy named Eddie B, defected after the Olympics in 1976, who really was a major influence on my career. He brought structure, intervals, intensity, training at the time, he was so much further ahead than anybody, but I had some really good groundwork. But that 2-month race period, and I'm building up to when I go to Europe, when I decided to move there at 19, but I went there and I raced 2 races in Switzerland. I won both those races, and they had all the best riders in Switzerland. And I raced 2 races in France that had some really good, actually a guy that, on my team at Renault, great rider, winning those 2 races. And then at the time, this was at the height of Eddie Merckx. The junior racing in Belgium was mind blowing. In a single day, on a Saturday, you could pick from 25 to 30 races, wow. 35 races. With the races I did were 150 riders in each race. And it was super competitive. And I won 6 out of the 8 races I got into there. And then I went to Poland for a 3-day stage race that Eddie B had organized. And I won one stage and crashed out, but I ended up 3rd overall. And we had Russians, East Germans, Czechoslovakians, Polish riders. And so when I came back from that trip, so remember, for that trip and for the years I got into it, people would say, there's no way. Literally, they tell me, there's God, you're good, but God, we're still so far away from how good the Europeans are. When I went over there and I logically looked, I said, okay, if I'm winning Switzerland, France, and Belgium, and I'm really, Eddie Merckx has to start off as a junior. Yeah. Bernard Hinault has to do that. So I'm going, they all put on their pants just like me, one leg at a time. And I came back and I really felt, I came back right after that trip, and I was been always goal oriented, but I wrote down goals to that year. I had a 3rd place in the Junior World Championships, got a bronze medal in the team time trial. I was 9th in the road race with a mechanical broken saddle. So my goal was the next year to win the Junior World Championships, win the Olympics in 1980, the Tour de France, World Championships at 22, mimicking kind of Merckx and Hinault's career. Yeah. The Tour de France at 25, and if I have had a 17-year-old ever come up to me and wrote that, I'd said, you're crazy. When I think back about it, it is kind of crazy. But it wasn't that I was crazy. I was actually very logical, and I'm going, okay. That's what I said. I was, whatever I was made to race bikes, because I was tactically really good, physically good, but I was passionate about it too. It was like, going to Europe and racing. There's not a more exciting sport than cycling. But I go, when I moved there at 19, it was a little bit moved up. Following year 79, I won the Junior World Championships. And then in 1980, racing up with the national team leading up to the Olympics, we went to Europe for about a 4-week trip. And I won the Circuit de la Sarthe, which was there's 2 pro open races, Tour de l'Avenir, which is like the miniature amateur Tour de France. And then Circuit de la Sarthe was the other open race at the time. Only amateurs could race at the Olympics, and then you had the pros at the Tour de France. And I won that stage race at 18 in front of I think the 3rd place in the Tour de France was there, East Germans. And it was that victory, then a race right after that where I probably would have won. I was 5 minutes up in a break with the Russians, and had a flat tire, ended up quitting the race. I got so upset about it. But I got offered a pro team by Cyril Guimard to race Renault. And that's how I got to Europe at 19. But it sounded like a dream career in a way. And it's so different today, because if you're a rider today, you already know about the tour. You know there's a pathway there. For me, what was really so, if I look at photos, I'm more passionate about seeing photos of that period in my first 4 or 5 years. It was the best part of my career, because it was discovery, something nobody's done. But it was not even what other people have done. It was like, discovering something that you had no clue you're ever going to do. And then it just was like, it's like, I always imagine, you're a singer, really talented singer, and all of a sudden you're good, and you want to go play bands, and you get to go play around the world. That's kind of what I got to do, and love doing it.
Yeah. So, I think that's you try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and it had to be a very surreal experience to start a sport, and within such a short period of time to see yourself excel and look around and see people that have devoted a lot of time into what you're doing, or into something that you're achieving and going well beyond them in a very short period of time. So that had to be a very unique experience. And I was just wondering what something like that feels like in real time.
Yeah, I wish I could duplicate that. I don't think you'll ever. I'm so fortunate. And then I said what's even better. I mean, my parents had very good, I'd say, work ethics, good morals, but it was always kind of, you have to work for what you wanted. My dad did spring for the bike, which was $800 at the time, but typically I would cut lawns and do odd jobs to go buy my fly fishing equipment, or he did help us on ski equipment, though. I can't say that. It's kind of nice to believe that you bought everything as a kid.
Right.
Yeah, they were good at Christmas and birthdays, incredibly, but they kind of instilled that you still have to earn your way. Mm-hmm. But to go into bike riding, I think when I was 16 years old, I think I made $10,000 worth of prizes and all that. I bought my first car with that prize money. So imagine that. Imagine mowing lawns, making $10 a week, and all of a sudden my first race, I get $150 in prizes. Yeah. So you combine the excitement of racing, then all of a sudden you get paid to do it. It's kind of like
as a kid, literally as a kid, right?
Yeah, no, I made probably $5,000 the first year in prizes, and what's crazy in cycling, and part of it is it was a club system in Europe, and it's one of the few sports in the Olympic sports that allowed you to collect not only prize money but cash prize money. And mainly because it was a sport that had a lot of cost. You had your bikes, you had your wheels. And I think that's the part of it, because my sister she was a national team member on gymnastics. And if you took $100 gift by somebody, you're disqualified from the Olympics. And here, I think I turned professional in 1981 for $12,000 a year starting salary. And I made $30,000 a year before as an amateur. So
wow,
$30,000. I think back that $30,000 was a lot of money.
Well, that leads into the fact that you were the first cyclist to sign a contract, $1 million contract. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, because cycling, it's been, I remember negotiating after I won that race in France in 1980, and then I had an offer from Peugeot and Renault, but I knew I wanted to go with Renault, and the Peugeot kept going. I got signed for 6,000 francs, and Peugeot got up to 20,000, but I didn't want to go with them. So the more I just said no, the more they offered. But it was the right choice I made. But it was always taboo to even talk about your salaries or anything, because I always looked at it. Oh, you don't want to. If somebody's only making 20 grand, you're making 100 grand. You don't want to create this divide. But I think it was more of a strategic decision by the directors, because it was their budget. And if one rider knew that I was getting paid more than them, but they were a better rider than me, then they'd be asking for more. So it was less bottom line profit for the owner of the team. So, but when I signed, when I got lured away from, at the time I was Renault, my first team, I got lured away by Bernard Tapie to go to Hino's team. And still, I had the habit of not talking about salaries, mainly because it's a taboo subject. But Bernard Tapie announced it. And what's crazy with the currency and all that, everybody thought I got paid $1 million a year in 1985. It was $1 million over 3 years.
Okay. Which is
but
still a lot of money.
Well, yeah, it is. But what happened after I won the Tour de France in '86, then I think the story that I've heard is Stephen Roche won the Tour de France in 1987. So as a Tour de France winner, I'm the Tour de France winner making $1 million a year. He won the Tour de France. He asked for $1 million. And then Delgado the next year asked for $1 million. So literally they raised, Bernard Tapie announced that I made $1 million, which was 300 grand.
Right.
They thought I was getting paid $1 million. So at the time, the leap from $1 million to $2 million wasn't, and it was the same thing when I literally people were bidding that money up. I mean, I actually had enough offered twice as much from Toshiba. No, $1 million more than from Toshiba, $3 million versus $2 million. But Toshiba was the same team that told me they were no longer interested after I got shot. Right. So I enjoyed kind of bidding that one up. But it's kind of funny because it was, money was really important, but also because I was realistic. I knew I do remember leaving Renault because Guimard at that time, I was third place, and he told me that I did the Tour de France relative to Fignon, who won it on one leg because I had bronchitis. And he said, but if you leave me, you'll never win the Tour de France. And I'm going, so you're the key to me winning the Tour. And I'm going, well, screw you. What does that mean?
Right.
So that sealed the deal for me. And I was getting offered $300,000 from Lobby Claire. He was paying me $100,000. I just asked for a $50,000 kicker to stay with him. And he said no. So I left him. And so that's where in hindsight, he made a big mistake. And I said, I'm not always about money. You have to pick the right team, because success is really, you got to be happy with the team you're on. But Guimard's mentality at that time was, you'll first win 5 Tour de France, and then you'll make money. And I'm going, what? What if I get an injury? What if I get in a hunting accident?
Right. Right.
But I looked at it as all kind of manipulation of the athletes, and I was a little bit. I'm not that naive. I act naive, but I'm not naive.
Yeah. Well, let's cover that, because a lot of the listeners to this podcast know I love cycling. I've had other cyclists on. They may, or I'm sure they're familiar with your story, but I have some other ones that are not. And you did it again. You go, well, when I got shot, and then you just move on. You were shot, and that is a life-altering accident that happened to you. And then there's a process afterwards to get back, not only to to get your form back, but going back to win it to Tour de France. So explain real quick, the freak accident, and then really the damage that it continues to do, and how that played out in your career.
Yeah, you're right. It's by habit, because actually I probably continued to do that because I had to act like nothing was really wrong, because I was after I got shot, the team that I was on, Lobby Claire, which I won the Tour de France the year before, sent me notice that they're no longer. They thought I would never come back, and they let me go a month after I got shot. So honestly, that year I had there were 2 teams that were interested in me, and I had to pretend that it was a minor accident, and it truly wasn't. I think that's why I'm not that type of person who has to compete against Hino and Merckx, but at times you still want to be recognized for your talent.
Sure.
And so I can tell you there's nobody in the sport, and I know Chris Froome got injured. I can't compare, but mine was as serious as any. I say this only because I nearly died, but it was not just. I discovered I still have 50 lead pellets in, because I never took an X-ray in my right arm. I have about 15 there that I never saw, but I had 3 in my heart, not 2 in my heart, 3 in my liver. But it was, let's just say, when I got shot, I broke my hand in a race in March in the Tirreno Adriatico. So I was out of racing. They told me 6 months. So I have never hunted turkey ever, but my uncle invited me, and it was turkey season, spring season. And I grew up bird hunting. So I'm not saying I was, when I say, I shouldn't have gotten hunting or should have gotten hunting, I grew up with trap shooting, and my parents didn't hunt, but I did hunt quail. So it wasn't that odd for me to go and say yes, but in Europe, it was like, what the hell are you doing hunting? Right. It was like a 2-hour outing that would have maxed 2-hour outing, probably wouldn't have gotten anything. But I did go, and my brother-in-law was with me, and my uncle, who my brother-in-law never hunted at that time. But it was just a freak accident. You're camouflaged, and we split up, and I went, you kind of walk, see where they're roosting. We weren't calling them in. It was just hoping to see one.
Right.
And I'm glad I never shot one, because they're too much. They're docile birds, actually.
Right.
Easier to shoot a quail and you're going to eat it. But one thing, never hunt anything without eating it. That was my parents' lesson. But anyways, my brother-in-law just saw movement and shot me. But I was really close to dying. And if it wasn't for a helicopter, I would have not made it. But I went from, say, 148 and 4 or 5% body fat at that time to 119 pounds, 117, 119 pounds, and lost. So that, in 19% body fat. So I lost 30, 40 pounds of muscle mass, 70% of my blood volume. But, in the recovery from that, and I'm shocked even when I look back, because I had to pretend I wasn't injured. I literally raced again. did my first race in September, which is it's insanity. And it's because I would not, the team that I went with, PDM, if I did not race a race by the end of the year, I was not going to, they would not take me. So I went back and I could make it 1 mile in the race. And I had to pretend I had a flat tire. The next race I got through 12 miles of it. But which even more absurd is by October, I got 39th place in the Tour of Ireland. And I'm just going, when I look back, I'm going, I don't know how I did that.
Yeah.
But it started me off on this yo-yo of really getting overtrained, racing into races that I wasn't really physically prepared to do. And at the time, I loved racing versus training. Racing's exciting. So when you race to train, that's great, but you had to be in really good shape. But already by the following year, I was with PDM and I was in a race in March and it crashed and had a tendon injury. So I literally took the rest of that season off, had tendon surgery. So I started really from scratch, but to say that it was an easy comeback. It was actually mental. It did mark me permanently, and that's what trauma does, period. You could say it doesn't impact you, but I was much more emotional after that. I think I had more empathy for people who've been injured, but to say that there wasn't trauma and that it was so easy. It was the most difficult thing ever. And
yeah.
I look back, I'm so grateful that I did come back and win another 2 Tour de France's, because I could have easily been dead, but and I don't think I ever came back to the level I was before that. And so I'm at the same time, I'm happy I came back. So there's some bittersweetness to it, because I really felt like I was really young mentally for racing, and I felt I could race all the way through 96 or so. That's what my goal was. And I won the Tour de France 89, where I don't think I was not even close to 86. 1990, I had mono until I was out. I was basically almost in bed through April, but I still won the Tour that year. In the 91, I was at my very best, and I don't know if I was as good as 86, but it was the best I've ever been. And I got my ass handed to me. I ended up in 7th place, and it was at the beginning of the EPO period. And so it was kind of this bittersweet, that I came back one, but I think I was really, I missed another 2 or 3 years there. I think through the rest of the peloton, doping and training speeds that were so high that if you weren't doing it, you couldn't recover. And so, but I have to go back and look. I'm just grateful I had that career I did. But no, there's no doubt. And I say this, he talked about the kind of the habits and the consequences of habits. And I was an oddball probably in cycling for sure. Everybody else went to bed at 10. I'm a night owl. I've got ADD, let's say, no doubt, but there's a lot of benefits from that. And part of ADD is curiosity. And that's really what I had, a very open mind for stuff. I was very analytical. I read a lot. And so very few people wanted a room with me. I used a room by myself because I would go to bed at midnight, 1 o'clock, where everybody's at bed at 10. But we also raced around 11 o'clock. So I still got my 8 hours in.
Sure.
I was an oddball because I was, when I raced I think I raced the Red Zinger Classic in 1979, and I was a junior, and it was 10-day race, and I would have won the race if I didn't crash the last race, but it was like a real stage race in Europe, and I met my wife there, and we would go out and watch movies, go to dinner, walk around, and I still would have won the race. And it was Europeans there. So for me to go from that to go into Europe and living like a monk, literally, if you were told if you walked on your legs, it was bad. So it was a very drastic change for me. And it was a struggle because that's not my personality.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that really restrictive. They had a lot of, I call it superstitions of what you could and couldn't do. And I fought against that, and in a kind of a, okay, you can't eat ice cream, so it hurt your liver. So I'd get a big bowl of ice cream and eat this big bowl of ice cream from in front of the rest of the team, and I'd go out and do as well as anybody.
Right.
But at the same time, I did that, or cheeseburgers. Oh, cheeseburgers are so bad for you. I also looked at the time that you're a furnace and calories when you're racing. And it truly is that way. Yeah. Even though everybody looks at, the diet's really that important. I don't believe near the Tour de France, your body can't distinguish between protein, carbohydrates, and fats. That's not what you want to eat every day, but a cheeseburger. So I'd eat one cheeseburger in the Tour de France. That's it.
Yeah.
But then it became, when I got shot, all these bad habits I had. Oh, you're not coming back because you ate cheeseburgers. Oh, you ate pizza, or you played golf. So that became my reputation from after I got shot. Not looking at literally that I almost died in an accident. And it really took a huge amount of effort to come back. But the idea was that I never came back like I was before because of all these. I ate ice cream. That's kind of the mentality I fought.
Instead of looking at the fact that the habits that got you to where you were before you got shot are the same habits that got you winning Tour de France after you got shot. There's a lot of people, on the podcast here, we talk about identity, and there's a lot of times when someone feels their identity, the thing that they really think of themselves as, say, a bike racer, and that gets potentially taken away by a crazy accident. There's a couple different directions you can go. And one is the one you took, and the other one is, well, that was a fun ride. I guess it's all over now. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think one of my strengths is I for whatever it is, I don't give up. If I decide I could go through a lot of pain, and it, I'm not an idiot too. If I was not talented enough, at one point, if you're getting dropped, you're not good. But I knew that, like when I got shot, I knew I won the Tour de France. So I believed, given time, I could get back there. And that's what gave me the patience to kind of go through some really difficult periods. I mean, I put it lightly. It was really difficult for the 2 years. But I know that it serves me even today. I mean, there's been a lot of difficulties from, life's not always easy. And sometimes it becomes really, really difficult to think you can make it through certain things. And yes, I always look at it, as long as you can endure whatever the stress is, it will get better. Things don't always stay the same.
Yeah. Endure is a great word when I think about you, Greg, and your career. And you mentioned, I had some yo-yos, and that was on the bike, off the bike. But here you are. It always seems to me, if you play the long game, and if you keep your intentions right and you just keep at what you're doing, then you end up winning. And it's been interesting to sit back and follow your career early on, getting shot, coming back from that, some of the drama that's gone on within the world of cycling, for even speaking up and saying, hey, like this, something seems a little crazy, something doesn't feel right in the environment we're in, having lived through it yourself. That had to be, I heard you speak about this before, and I found it really interesting, where you're not getting the results, but that you're in the same shape that you were. Like you said, what was it, 91? You said, I'm in the best shape of my life. Something's not right. And that had to be a really difficult time where you start going, is it me?
I still did not. There wasn't. So we had a teammate from PDM, Johannes Dreyer, that died of a heart attack in 1990, I think. And so then we heard about EPO at that period, but really nobody knew. And that we kind of figured it probably was something to do with the doping program that PDM had. And so, but you don't know hard facts. You just don't know.
Right.
And then in 1991, I mean, what you find out imagine a racer's career is 14 years long. And this is why I always smile when I quit. I remember hearing a cyclist say how, I had retired in 94 and he was racing pro at 96. And he said, oh, the sport's changed so much since you retired. And I'm going, what? What? That's what whoever's new to cycling, they believe that all of a sudden the sport's different. So you imagine, I think what's the rider that is right now racing? He's 49 years old.
That's unreal.
What's his Italian? So he started in 92. But what you find is slightly evolved, but really things don't change. Athletes don't evolve like some of the people would say. You adapt to it. So from 81, you could see videos, you look at the change of the racing style, but maybe everybody was like today, I think people are fitter at the beginning of the year, no doubt. And they got pressures that, but are they athletes any better? I don't believe that. I think every generations are all good athletes, but you adopt to how, so now today, in the last, 15 years, a lot more knowledge about for the average person. Because really, I mean, even today when I hear training, people who are talking about training, even at the pro level today, I still think they all follow, they're like sheep, literally.
Right.
If somebody's on a keto diet, all of a sudden you're on a keto diet. And they all chase these fads because they all believe something else is going to make them faster. And really, I don't believe it's all common sense. And that's physiology hasn't changed. There's maybe some kind of ideas that maybe, but I still, this whole fat burning whole idea, that's great, but you still need carbohydrates for the peak output. And fat burning, even the myth of fat burning, train long and slow. I don't believe there's scientific data that tells you training long or slow helps metabolize fat. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of other things that go on that help do that. But I look at it going, how much has changed? But I do know in 91, I had raced by that time it was my 10th year. And we had a stage where we averaged 31, 32 miles an hour. It was about 140 miles. We had stopped for 3 train stops. So our average speed was still 31 miles an hour. It's 50 Ks an hour. We had periods at 60, 65 Ks. And that tour, it never had one slow day. Every tour that I've done, the 4th or 5th day, everybody gets tired in a similar period. Yeah. So you have 1 or 2 days where you end up riding slow because everybody's kind of tired. But that year, it wasn't. It just went nonstop. And so I went and watched my team. We won the team classification the year before I won the overall. We had half the guys quit that year, and I couldn't stay up. So it was a dramatic deal. But even then, I didn't go, my performance, I got 7th because others were cheating. I looked at what was wrong with me. Yeah. It didn't really dawn on us until 93 when we heard about Ferrari and all the riders he was training. And then we looked at these teams that would send 5 guys off and drop everybody. Yeah. And you go, things don't change that quickly. Yeah. So it was, but still most athletes really, it's at least the riders I was in, we weren't looking at, what are they doing? How do we train better? How do we prepare better? But we were pretty naive too at the same time. If you're not, it's kind of like, people kind of go, come on, why wouldn't you be with a Ferrari Conconi? But if you're a drug user, you think everybody uses drugs. Yeah. So the fact is, I never had a doctor. And so I wasn't in that crowd. So I wouldn't even know who to talk to if I wanted to talk to. And I never sought it out. So we didn't know what was really going on. So, and I remember my last year in 1994, a rider named Philip Casado, Eric Boyer and I were doing the first comedy, and we were.
Hey, Greg. I think something's scratching the microphone there.
Probably me. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So we were the Tour Romandy in 94, and a teammate, Philip Casado, came up to Eric Boyer and myself, and he came up smiling and laughing. He said, "Oh, you guys, forget about it. You guys have no chance." He just left our team because of the tremendous pressure to perform. What was happening, because we weren't performing, riders were getting their pay cut literally in half. But at the same time in 93, everybody's going, okay, this is what teams have. They have Ferrari Conconi. Well, if you want us to perform like that, then you have to bring the same thing, or else just leave us alone. And of course, the director absolutely I could never ethically do that. So this one rider decided, okay, am I going to take a pay cut in half, or I'm going to go to another team? And I say this because he was a really good guy, but he came up and he said, it was Mercatone Uno. And he said they had a laboratory in the back of his bus. And he said, I did the Tour of Spain with my nose, they call it breathing through my nose. Yeah. And he said, hardly any training. I did growth hormone, testosterone, EPO. He said, you don't have a chance. And I just remember Eric and I going, look at this it's over. We're done. And so, but he ended up, I'm not saying this was a complication of that, but he ended up passing away the following year of a heart attack.
Yeah.
And that's really unusual. And so so then you talk about, my infamous run-in with Armstrong. That's, I'm just saying I had that background, and I was outspoken long before even thinking about Armstrong. I mean, I was 98 when Festina Fair happened, and it was a bloodbath. And I said it was the best thing to ever happen cycling.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I'm saying this because it's, I guess I looked at after, I got my career, then I spent a really long period of battling Armstrong and fighting off, accusations of jealousy. I'm just not a jealous person, but when I learned more about Armstrong in 2000, that was not good for me, because if I never heard it, I had nothing firsthand. I had nothing, let's say secondhand, but somebody from his team. It became very difficult to go along with the, I call it the lie, the support. And I wasn't seeking anything out, but was baited by a journalist. But that became a 15-year battle with him.
Yeah. So that had to feel very strange. I mean, between that the incident with Floyd, I mean, it had to be really disheartening, just because as an American cyclist, you've got certain people. I mean, there's gentlemen like Davis Finney, people that maybe you rode with earlier on, but as people are coming up, some of the top names in cycling that are American are having these interpersonal things going on, and I would imagine that had to be a disheartening thing for you as well.
Well, for me, I literally, after I got done with cycling, after the EPO era, I literally had lost interest in the sport. And I said, I went back in 98 and Festina Fair, and I'm like, that's the best thing ever to happen.
Yeah.
I actually started the Lamont cycling tours. Was going to do it like a travel to complement our bike business, and ended up giving that business plan to John Burke, and I started Trek Travel. So, but I literally went there in 98, 99 and did this Tour de France, and I was excited about it. I really believed this was going to be a new start for cycling. And with the Festina Fair, how bad it was, it's the wake-up call that I thought was going to change the sport. And so when Armstrong came back, I believed he came back because it was clean. The sport was clean. I mean, if you're clean, and all the they stopped, somehow the detection, and it put people at risk. They wouldn't be risking it because it could have killed the sport, almost killed the sport in Festina. So then when I learned something differently, then it's, especially as somebody's coming back and claiming it was, XYZ when it's not, it became difficult. But I ended up being into a long-term, it wasn't really about Armstrong. It was always getting basically muffled, or I say you could do one-liners. I think I get 4 interviews between 2001 and 2008, 4 interviews. Because I was always under the threat. If I mentioned one thing about it, I would be in a lawsuit. And it became to I didn't have even a voice. And it really took me away from the sport.
Yeah.
And I have always argued, well, let Armstrong say what he wants. I could say what I want. And, some people buy my bike, some people buy a Trek. But anyways, and that was, I said it being, if you know me, I'm just not a person that is envious of anybody. I'm happy where I am. I am happy who I am. But it became a PR stunt to really discredit me. And it was very difficult. It was incredibly difficult because, but in a way, it's sometimes I wish I would have never, because I would have had a business that would have been well over $100 million in business. And I go, God, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. But I wouldn't have done it any other way, because that's just not who I am.
Yeah.
It goes against everything I stand for.
Yeah.
So
there's something to be said. There's something to be said about being authentic and saying what you're going to say, because it's what you feel. So, no, I say good on you. That's and again.
Well, I said nothing. I agreed with a journalist. He said, well, if he's clean, that's the greatest comeback in the history of the sport. And I said, yeah. If he's not, that's what he asked me. I said, well, then it would be the greatest fraud, because it would be.
Right.
If he's clean, greatest comeback. If it's not, it is the greatest, because it's defrauding the people making him believe that it was just, hard work, especially because he is monetizing it. He was monetizing that,
Sure.
that whole comeback. So, but I only agreed to that that became a quote, and it started a battle. I mean, it started a battle. I mean, Armstrong called me up and said he'll find people that say I took drugs, and literally, I mean, anyways, it became really, really most challenging thing in my career in a way. I remember being interviewed by the Department of Justice when they subpoenaed our lawsuit files from the Trek lawsuit, and the agent said, you had a bounty on your head. And I go, what do you mean? Yeah, Armstrong he was willing to, was trying to find people offering up to $300,000 to find somebody that say I took EPO. So imagine offering $300,000. And I know who he offered it to. And he, in spite of that, he couldn't find anybody.
Wow.
So anyways, that was a kind of bizarre period of my career. And it was actually really challenging, but it's also, kind of pushed me away from the sport, but that's part of my DNA. And I came back, and I do love bikes. I love equipment. I think I have really good ideas. And so that kind of divorcing myself from that, actually, it's opened up other opportunities. So it's kind of like as hard as that was, it opens another door. And that's why I kind of look back at the perseverance, or, sometimes faced with a challenge, you actually have to figure out a better way to do, or another way to think about things. And that's really what's happened. And so I think, and I feel like in the most exciting period of my career, at least since I stopped racing.
Yeah.
Is good.
Yeah, that's that quote. So I follow some stoicism and as a philosophy, and the obstacle is the way. Sometimes is
absolutely. I think absolutely. I mean, and I probably am that type. I mean, it's kind of like the challenge. Oh, you can't do that. Anybody says I can't do it, I prove them wrong.
Yeah.
So even that held me up when I got shot. It was like, oh, you're over. But it kind of does motivate me. And sometimes there probably was this, I always liked the challenge more than I think if it was just too easy. And that's kind of what I go back when I started racing. If it was too easy, it was not exciting to me. It wasn't about winning races. And I say this because when a guy like Armstrong, there's other riders that literally race against people. For them, they have to be angry. They have to not like a person to motivate them. I don't remember that many pro racers. I just remember my challengers at the time, because for me, the race was at point A to point B. It was about how do I beat whoever's good at that time. I didn't have to race against anybody. I didn't have to get angry at Hino. I didn't have to get angry. Like Fignon did kind of thrive on a little bit of anger and, targeting somebody. But that just wasn't me. And that's why I say I'm a little bit of oddball there, because and it wasn't about the number of victories either for me. It was about how I won them. And did I do it myself, or did I do it cheating? It just was something that I'd rather never have a victory than know that I took a shortcut. I always look at the 90-degree turn. I could go 45 to the finish line and cut everybody off and win it. There are a lot of people who do that just because they get the win.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be a victory. It'd be, how could you be proud of that?
Yeah. One of the things I talked about with Sean Kelly about is you have the phenomenon of just being a naturally gifted athlete. And let me know if you're running out of time here, but
no, good.
So you have a natural athlete, and then you have somebody who works really hard, and to combine those two, or have somebody that combines those two, can be hard to find.
Yeah.
What was your training like as a kid? Because another thing that Sean Kelly said, or actually this was Ike Visbeek, he says one of the reasons that kids now are so good is they have natural talent, and then they have the ability to go online and see training programs and see ways that
absolutely.
Yeah, where when I was younger, I was always told it wasn't until your late 20s to 30s that the pro cyclists, they've got enough miles in their legs, I had been told. And now you're seeing, even like you said, when you were I've heard you say in interviews when I was just as good at 18 at 19 as I was later on in life.
Well, I don't think that's the case with the training. I think what Sean's mistaking is that between that and up until recently, if you weren't on a doping program or doing something, I'm going to tell you, I could have won the Tour de France probably at 19 or 20 if I look back at I think in 18 when I won the Red Zinger class. I was a junior, I was just turned 18 or 17. But it was a 10-day stage race, and it was incredibly hard in Colorado. And I won that. I was held back by the Eddie B, the coach. I wouldn't go into breakaways in the first couple of days. He would pull me out. So there was like 5 minutes. The competitors get 5 minutes up, and I still would have won the race. So I look at these young riders. It's not that because tactics today tactics are even lost because of radios. That's why I think what's interesting about Peter Sagan and some of these younger riders, they came from amateur racing without radios. And they're literally racing intuitively. And that's why I think there's some advantages to some of these younger riders, because so many riders are only race based upon what the coach tells them. Attacking out. And racing, I wish they would ban those. I mean, racing's about tactic, strategy. But most importantly, these guys have real talent. And it's a good sign. I'm not saying the sport is 100. I don't know if any sport will ever be 100% clean, because I think people are competitive. But I do believe that at this level, and I know there's a lot of skeptics out there, because when I've said, well, I'm excited about Pogačar. Or I've had people, well, there's this guy that worked from not Pogačar, but just blah, blah, blah. I'm not that type that speculates it, but I do know that Thibaut Pinot in 2000, I actually know Thibaut Pinot, this trainer. I've met him multiple times. He's published all his data. The French truly are on another level. The Tour de France is something that is a national treasure, and the French riders have higher standards of dope testing. But I know a guy like that. He had no reason not to release his data. Whenever I hear somebody go, well, I'm not going to release my data because it's a personal thing. I mean, why? It's not going to change anything. But he almost won the Tour de France in 2019. So when I see that, he probably would have won it. Bernal won it. But if you think of that one thing, so if he, I believe, is as clean as you could get in the last 30 years, since the 80s, let's say, almost won the Tour de France, it is that reason that these younger riders are able to perform. It is because the racing's cleaner. You're not having to be on a program. It takes a couple of years to convince somebody to be on a doping program. Imagine going to a pro team and at 19, you end up being, living with IVs. So it takes a while to convince riders to come over to that. So the fact that some of these riders are literally first year, 2 years, second year pros doing that well is really encouraging to me. So I think that's more it. But I do think the overall level of knowledge for training is way better. But I still think there's so much. I have a trainer that trains in one of the pro teams, and he was my early trainer, a physiologist. But I still think people just are, they throw kind of logic away. I still think people overtrain most of the time. And the idea that what's happening today in pro cycling is, and I look at the speeds of climbing, it's almost impossible today because they've got these riders basically starving themselves and losing muscle mass. So the times should be faster up a climb. It's also very unhealthy. And so, but then, so I think there's some good things about the sport right now that I'm excited about. Anyways, I think we were talking about the consequences of habit. I always think that I'm probably one of so if you have ADD like I do, I did thrive when I had structure within a team, had things organized. It's more about having things organized because I've got too many things on my mind. But I wasn't I remember inviting Sean Kelly to a dinner at our house. He agreed. He didn't know how to say no. But then his wife called up, and it was like 7:30 the dinner, because usually in France you eat at 7:30. Right. And his wife called up, well, usually Sean's in bed by 8, 8 or 9. And so I'm going, oh, okay. But it's interesting because, if you look at his background, he's a farmer. He wakes up very early every morning. So he continued that habit. And I wish I was more like that. I do believe, I wish I had that mentality to be a little bit more, I don't know. But I am who I am. So if I would have had more of a what people would call a dedicated, more, say better habits, would have been that much better. I don't know, but I am kind of who I am.
Yeah.
And you have to look at each individual rider, what makes them tick, because maybe I could have done that, but I could have been intensely miserable. I see a couple of riders today really midway through their career, and I don't think they want to race anymore. And part of that is they literally, these teams have them on a strict diet. And I don't believe, the only question I have is I don't get these strict diets when you're racing, because your body, there's no diet you should be on when you're racing. Maybe in the off season where you gain a little bit too much weight, but they're living a life that isn't natural to them. And so it's a very hard life. And so you have to do your best. You have to live in a lifestyle and a structure that you can still be happy doing, because if you're not happy doing it, you'll never perform. You have to love what you're doing.
Yeah, that's one of the things I talked to Sean about, and Ika is the seasons are longer, way longer, right? And and then the mental side.
Seasons started in February till October, but what's happening now? You got January. It's more that you have to be. Some of the riders, they have to be on top of the season's about the same length, but they have to be in shape earlier. Yeah. And then there's got radios. So they have, I think there's a lot more pressure on them, but the unhealthy pressure is this, it goes back to the same mentality when I was racing. They believe that if you allow a little bit of freedom, it's not good for them. So Peter Sagan would not be, he's got this mentality that he's a little more open. And I've heard people go, well, he'd be better if he just lived and raced more, he's more dedicated. Well, he'd probably be miserable doing that. Well, you wouldn't see Peter Sagan racing.
Well, that's what we're seeing with riders like Tom Dumoulin that had to step away.
Right.
It's, there's the mental aspect of anything you do. And there has to be a level of sustainability throughout somebody's career. And if you don't have that, then I would think the sport has to start looking at it and going, all right, so the pressures have to be too much on these guys. And, I think,
Kittle.
Yeah.
I'm having a blank.
His first name?
Yeah.
Is it Marcel?
Marcel Kittle. Oh my gosh. Yes. I'm sorry. So Marcel Kittle, he's a guy that I've watched, and I don't know any of his story, but I've watched him. I started doing Eurosport in 2014, and this guy was winning. He was so powerful.
Yeah.
And then somebody in his coach, I could see it. Somebody convinced him to do this low-fat diet, or not low-fat, starvation diet, so he could lose more muscle mass.
Yeah. It's big.
And this is the only thing I get suspicious so I've heard riders they're taking cortisone to lose a lot of muscle mass. So if you're losing muscle mass, you're catabolic. So your body's always trying to get in balance. So if you train super long, that's why people lose a lot of muscle mass. They're catabolic. They're eating muscle for energy, literally.
Yep.
But if you do that for extended periods without recovery, you literally get chronically overtrained, and you can't recover unless you take testosterone, or you have to take periods. So my question is, are they doing this and having to take testosterone prior to racing? Because you can't go from a catabolic state to an anabolic state if you're chronically overtrained. But I look at depression. I mean, if your testosterone's low and you're starving, you can truly create somebody who has like chronic depression.
Sure.
And so you look at it and you go, what price is that? He would have been better off, Marcel, living the life he needed to, staying as a good sprinter. But I believe there's a lot of this stuff, and this whole fanatical watching your weight is doing real damage to certain riders. And I think you look at that, and a guy like a sprinter's a mentality of a skier. They're not made to be like a monk, live life like a monk. So you have to look at individuals as individuals, not as this is he has a blanket policy, and that's the very best coaches look at riders as individuals, and they tweak the way they take care of them, the way their program is based upon those individuals. And those are the very best coaches. And there's aren't that many good ones like that.
Yeah.
So they end up kind of like a factory, and this is the program, this is what you eat. I look at Sky that way. Sky was kind of like a factory where they believe that was your success, but yeah, it worked for some. Doesn't mean it worked for everybody.
Yeah. There's another long game that's playing out. Interestingly, the whole Sky thing is stuff that's coming out in the media now. It's I won't say anything, but other than to say that things will play out the way that they play out, right? But
not a good thing. Yeah, I don't know. I just know that it's not good when you have that the recent doctor who's been found guilty. Yeah. That's not a good sign. Yeah, it's. I don't know. Sometimes when it's too good to be true, it usually is. I hate to say that. Right. And I say there's really no secrets in life. And, you know, if you're good at 19, you're good at 20, 21, 22, not when you're 30. I'm sorry. It's just, you call it like it is. That's what it is. And anybody who does that, suspicion should go up.
Sure. All right, Greg, I'm going to let you get going here. I got one last question. Cycling in the U.S., where do you see it going? I know you have a little involvement with the World Cycling League. Do you see track cycling as something that grows here in the U.S.? What's your vision?
It would.
What's that?
I wish it would. I look at Australia and every great riders, the amount of riders that come out of Australia.
Yeah.
At 25 million people, that's Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But they all come from a background of, they start off track riding. I love track riding. To me, I think when you think of like a potential starting a new league, and who would have thought boxing, and you'd have this new, what's the other league? I like watching traditional boxing.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the kickboxing? What's the,
like an MMA, like a UFC kind of thing.
Yes. Yes. So who would have thought that is actually probably more profitable, more money than traditional boxing? But I do think cycling, I wish even Europe, the problem with like 6-day races, they're basically appearance races for road riders. So they're not raced like they should be, which is like a stage race. But I still think there's a hope for that. And I think that if there's any American sport that could actually appeal to people, track racing could really appeal to them. But I think there's a, you know, if you look at riding on the road, people are nervous. I think that should change. If people should wear LED lights, they should make sure they're seen. I think people are switching to gravel, which is great. It's still cycling. But I do think, I wish there was an urban type of, you know, we have criterions, but a way to attract people that might never get into cycling. I think track racing, criterion racing, urban league racing could be really help feed into some great athletes. And I think of the high school mountain biking program,
Sure.
But how great, you know, I think there's 40,000 high school students. When you tap into that type of talent pool, you're going to get great riders on it. And I think all these things help, you know, even help build cycling. Even I look at, you know, Zwift is a great deal because they might start off virtually racing themselves, but most of the time, and I say Peloton, the big indoor cycling, it's actually good for cycling because people get into cycling, they love it. But once they discover riding outdoors, they become real cyclists, I say, because it's great to ride indoors, not the rest of your life.
No.
I think people need to ride outdoors. So I think there's a great, everybody always judges American cycling by the amount of races are there going to be races? I think gravel racing is going to take over road racing, but it is road racing. Doesn't matter if it's gravel. I mean, is Paris-Roubaix a gravel race, a cobble race, or road race? It's all. Right. It's everything. And I think what's great about I think the gravel racing is that you can do it in venues that have no traffic. It's safer. So, and I was always a cyclist. I had a mountain bike. My very first mountain bike was 1981. Wow. And I look at cyclists when I hear road riders, I don't ride mountain bike. I go, and a mountain bike rider doesn't ride road. Then, I mean, I think I love whatever you do on a bike. And I think, you know, the more disciplines you can have out there, the better. And I think when you think of commuting, I wish we could figure out, I think the high school programs are probably the most important because it exposes them to the beauty and joys of cycling. And I wish they'd expand that beyond just mountain biking, but even into road riding, into gravel racing. Because then you get these high school kids that are cyclists for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And I actually remember 1996 trying to meet with I did have a meeting with the head of USA Cycling at the time. And when I moved to Minneapolis in 1987, and they had a high school racing program for cross-country skiing, and 4,000 high school students in the metropolitan area of Minneapolis participated in that. At the time, there were 2,000 registered junior racers in the United States. So Minneapolis had 4,000 cross-country skiers, and they had 2,000 nationally. Now, their effort should have been working with the Olympic Committee in high schools and going, let's build an Olympic-type program where they're actually, their goal is out of high school, they can get into cycling. You tap in that talent pool. I said, you'll get more Tour de France winners out of that type of program than you would ever trying to sponsor a national team. Yeah. And so there's a lot of good things that can change. But I'm just glad that cycling is still I'm happy always to hear that I see people. That's what's great about Facebook. You see that people got into cycling in the 80s. I meet people every time. Oh, I watch the Tour de France. They're still riding today. Yeah. And they're talking about it today. And that's key.
Greg, I remember watching you. You had won the Tour, and you were doing the commercials for Taco Bell, and I thought it was the coolest thing. You're delivering tacos on your bike.
I grew up at Taco Bell though in LA, so it was.
I remember. I was like, because I was. This is back in the I don't know when that was, but it had to be late 80s, early 90s, and cycling. 1990. In 1990, and I was riding. I was a kid. None of my friends really rode bikes. I only had to ride with adults. My dad had gotten me into it. You didn't see it on TV unless it was John Tesh's voice, and we were usually recording, just the tours, the stages of the tour. So to see you doing a Taco Bell commercial I thought it was awesome. I loved it.
That was a big breakthrough because every athlete. It was always the Olympic model. So you wanted to go get a gold medal so you can have a Wheaties or some commercials. So in cycling, I won the 86 Tour, nothing. It took until I won the 89. Then maybe I didn't have the best agents. I don't know. But that was at least I really liked Taco Bell. Right. At the time I grew up literally, but my grandmother in Long Beach had a motel, and Taco Bell was a block away that we would go to at least once a week to get Taco Bell. So that was my big TV breakthrough. Didn't do a lot of commercials. I did a Cadillac and a Taco Bell. I think that's it.
All right. Well, I didn't see the Cadillac one, but the Taco Bell one stood out for sure. But
great. I love it.
Yeah. Greg, you've been very humble with your time here, or gracious with your time. I'm really blown away to have you on. This is just huge for me personally. I have a feeling that the listeners are going to get a ton from this, and we're excited to see what Lamont bikes are doing. I mean, we didn't talk about it too much, and I do want to cover just real quick the fact that you're making amazing bikes. They're at a price that is not insane. People, this is going to be an e-bike made out of carbon fiber that people can afford, which I think is a really.
Well, this bike would retail for $7,000-8,000. I mean, if we were pricing it for it would be that. We have some. My goal is to bring really incredible value, and I think as we have some really exciting products coming out, I think we'll provide great value, really safe. So yeah, I think I'm proud of the bikes we did. I said it was they're both basically the Prologue it's an all rounder. It's a gravel bike with straight bars. Yeah. We're coming out with an option to have an adjustable stem, but the Dutch bike I think is the fun one to ride though.
Yeah, it looks cool.
So
yeah, it looks.
I said the design literally is for my wife, and it's been about 8 years going, we got to build a carbon fiber Dutch bike that is so my wife will ride it. Yeah. So it's a good, and I think it'll do well in Europe. I think more people can recognize the upright position as a fun way to get around a city. Yeah. But you can still ride it. It's the same. It's a 27-pound, 250-watt motor, so you can go out in the country. You can ride anywhere with it. Yeah. So. Yeah, and we have some other a couple different e-bikes coming out in the future. A fixed kind of a belt, a Gates belt type Dutch and Prologue. This next end of the fall, end of the year. Just kind of, we're using a hub motor in the back that requires, you need internal gear there. So we're looking at different options of gearing. So we'll add some other products to that mix and some mechanical versions.
Well, you're going way back on the Dutch style bikes then with the internal gears in the back hub, like the old...
maybe not internal in the back hub, but maybe spider type gear in the mid drive.
Oh,
so yeah, cool. So I mean, there's just different ways. We're I'm trying to, and we're going to have different price points too. We want to bring some, maybe bring that price down, a little bit more as our manufacturing gets a little bit more efficient.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to do that. And I think the great thing about, carbon fiber is the best product material, period. But there are things that, from a day-to-day use, they can be fragile too. So we're working on making that really almost like a metal, like where you don't have to I'm the type that doesn't really want to watch their equipment.
Yeah.
I used to toss my bike on the ground. Like, what do you do? Like, I come up and take a water rake and just let it fall over on the grass. And so I'm building a bike that I know that I can ride, so I don't have to watch it and look like I don't have to be a mechanic to make sure it's safe to ride.
Yeah.
So I'm a very practical rider. I'm not. I think things need to be super simple, stupid simple, super whatever that is to put together, but also to ride. But it should be. I think safety is a really big deal on construction, and controlling that quality is really important. So that's my goal, is to make a bike that is incredibly safe and no worries about failure. And we're doing that. We're going to have some really exciting products coming out.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. I jumped on, they said, hey, Lamont's got some new bikes. I said, oh yeah. I got on the website. I'm like, oh, that's not what I expected. This thing looks really cool.
I know, I was waiting for a road bike. I am, but we've invented a new way, a new process for the road bike that I said we'll bring that into the e-bikes in the future, but it's a little more development time, but we should have a production bike, let's say by June.
Okay.
June, July. And so, yeah, I've got a whole full line of bikes, gravel, coming out with gravel. It's not just e-bikes, but we're going to have an electric version of all that. But I say I'm wanting to broaden the audience, not just attracting people who are road bikes riders, but I say it's still, my goal is to deliver a Tour de France bike that's as good as any Tour de France bike, and time trial bike for the teams. And so it'll be our product proving ground.
Yeah.
And trickle that down to all our other products. So, so we're not just two e-bikes.
It's exciting times. I imagine here in the Lamont house and office. So I'm excited to see what comes down the pipe. And
I am too. No, you'll see a road bike in the next month.
Very cool.
Next month, yeah. But and hopefully production by, I say, June, July. Perfect. And a gravel bike in the parallel.
Perfect.
So yeah.
All right, Greg, I'm going to let you get going with the rest of your day. Thanks again. I'm going to read some ads here for Lamont Bike when we're done in the upcoming episodes, and I'll be keeping track. When that road bike hits, the listeners here will know about it. So
okay, all right. Okay. All right. JT, thank you so much. This is great. Fun meeting you.
Yeah,
good question.
All right, thanks, Greg.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, that's it from me. Thank you to Greg for making this happen. Like I said, guys, please log on to the website, consequenceofhabit.com, or if you don't want to do that, at least do me a favor, go to the podcast and leave a review. It's important. I don't even know why it's important, but according to the people at Apple and Google and all that kind of stuff, I guess it means something. So please do me that favor. And with that said, I will catch you all next week.